I noticed the problem about 40 seconds into the briefing, which was roughly when Coordinator Velsoran introduced the phrase Combat Tier Cascade Protocol for the third time without blinking. I had a form in my pocket that said, Supplemental Practical Observation, Track 7. Whatever Track 7 was, I was reasonably confident it wasn't this. The room had 8 senior cadets seated around a semicircular operations console the size of a shuttle bay, holographic status columns cycling through threat taxonomies I'd never seen in my life, and a wall display running what appeared to be a real-time tactical terrain model of a pressurized habitat under simultaneous structural, chemical, and biologic failure. The form in my pocket was almost certainly a filing error. I considered raising my hand. I considered walking back to the intake corridor and finding whoever had sent me here. I considered a lot of things in about 4 seconds, and then I found a seat in the back row and decided that explaining the mistake would take longer than the assessment, and I'd been in harder rooms than this. Velsoran noticed me the way you notice something stuck to the bottom of a boot. She was Kel Varathi, tall, bilateral, bone lattice architecture visible along the ridge of her jaw and collarbone, the kind of pale internal glow that apparently meant she'd placed first in every assessment tier the Institute ran for the past 2 years. She didn't say anything. She looked at me, then at the seat I'd taken, then back at the briefing display, and the glow in her jaw lattice shifted to a frequency I didn't know the word for, but understood clearly enough. The unspoken translation was something close to, there is a filing error present, and it has found a chair. The briefing continued. I listened. The Emergency Containment Assessment, officially designated ECA-7, informally called the Cascade by the cadets who'd been trying to pass it for the last several years, ran 16 simultaneous failure nodes across a single pressurized habitat model, structural breach at 4 points, chemical dispersal on 2 vectors, biologic contamination seeded in the water reclamation loop, 17 civilian units represented as data tags inside the model, each one moving, each one requiring active rerouting to 3 designated safe zones, while the failure nodes were sequenced down in a specific order, or they compounded. The published record for a full clear was 22 minutes, set 6 years ago by a cohort that no longer trained here. Nobody had matched it since. The passing threshold was a partial clear, 12 of 16 nodes sequenced correctly within 40 minutes. 4 of the 8 cadets in this room had passed on previous attempts. The other 4 had not. I had spent 11 years supervising wildland fireline operations on 3 continents. I did not say this. There was no reason to say it. It wasn't relevant to the filing error, and it wasn't relevant to whoever was going to be embarrassed about the filing error once the assessment ended, and I found the intake office. I wrote nothing down. I sat in my back row seat and looked at the habitat model, rotating slowly on the wall display, and thought, 16 nodes, 4 breach vectors, 2 dispersal lines, biologic in the water loop, 17 civilians in motion. I'd managed worse with a 2-meter radio, a foam line with a pressure leak, and a tired crew of 14 who'd been awake for 31 hours. Velsoran opened the assessment at 0900. The first 4 nodes fired simultaneously. Structural breach at sectors 1, 4, 7, and 11. The cadets moved immediately, dividing the board by doctrine. 2 on breach, 2 on dispersal, 2 on biologic, 2 managing civilian routing. The coordination was fast. It was precise. I watched it and thought, they're fighting it the way you fight something you've studied, which is fine until the thing stops behaving the way the textbook said it would. Node 12 fired at 0903. It wasn't on the standard cascade sequence. Nobody had told me that, but it was obvious from the way 2 of the cadets stopped moving for almost a full second. In a fire, a full second costs you 30 feet of line. The biologic team absorbed Node 12's reroute demand, while still managing the water loop. That put 3 tasks on 2 cadets. Their output degraded. The water loop reroute fell behind. At 0906, Node 9 fired, the second chemical dispersal vector, and because the water loop was 3 minutes behind, the dispersal had a pathway it shouldn't have had. The cadet managing Sector 4's breach rerouted to cover the gap. That left Sector 4 entirely unmanaged. At 0908, 3 of the 17 civilian tags moved into Sector 4 on their own routing logic and walked directly into the structural breach window. Velsoren's jaw lattice pulsed twice. Not the color for approval. I was already at the secondary console in the back row, the one nobody was using. I hadn't asked. The seat had a panel, and the panel had an input interface, and I wasn't doing anything else, so I put my hands on it and started working. The first thing I did was ignore node 12. Not permanently, but node 12 was a secondary dispersal subloop, and it was loud, and loud problems convince people to move toward them when the real danger is always the quiet thing 3 nodes over that nobody is watching. I flagged 12 for deferred sequencing and pulled up the civilian routing map instead. 17 tags, 3 in the breach window. I rerouted them north toward Safe Zone 2, which meant crossing the leading edge of the chemical dispersal on Vector 1, which looked wrong on the model, but was actually fine because the dispersal propagation rate was slower along the northern wall. I could see it in the density gradient. It was the same physics as smoke in a ridgeline cut. You can move through the edge if you move fast and low. I rerouted them fast and low. All 3 cleared the breach window inside 90 seconds. Then I went back to node 12. By 0914, Velsoren had reorganized the board. The cadets were moving again. Faster, better. She was good, and the reorganization made sense for what they'd been trained to do. But the cascade had cost them 6 minutes of compounding drift, and at 0917, node 15 fired, which was the biologic loop reaching critical dispersion threshold, and the cadet managing the water reclamation response hadn't finished the reroute because he'd been pulled to cover Sector 4. Velsoren's hands moved to absorb it. She was fast. Genuinely fast. I was already inside the water loop from my back row panel. I'd been watching the reclamation reroute since 0908. I finished it in 4 inputs, not because I knew the protocol, I didn't. I'd never seen this system before in my life, but because a water reclamation reroute under biologic load has the same fundamental logic as redirecting a contaminated water source away from a fire line camp. The variables were different. The shape of the problem was the same. Velsoren noticed what I'd done at approximately 0919. She didn't say anything. She looked at my back row panel, looked at the water loop status, and then looked at me. The glow in her jaw lattice was doing something I hadn't seen it do before. I didn't know what it meant. I went back to the board. At 0924, we cleared node 16. 14 of 16 nodes sequenced, 2 more than the passing threshold. The wall display held the final status for 3 seconds. Then the assessment coordinator's voice came through the room speakers to confirm. ECA 7, partial clear, 14 nodes, time elapsed 24 minutes. First 14 node result in 6 years. The room was quiet. Not the quiet of people saying nothing, the quiet of people who have stopped doing the thing they were doing because something else has their attention. I felt it before I saw it. The shift. The way a crew goes still on the line when something happens that doesn't fit the model they came in with. I looked up. 6 of the 7 other cadets were looking at my panel. The 7th was Velsoren. She wasn't looking at the panel. She was looking at me. Her jaw lattice had gone a color I genuinely had no word for. Not the color for filing errors. Not the color for disapproval. Something else entirely. And whatever it was, it had been running for about 4 minutes without her doing anything to stop it. I saved my panel inputs to the session log, which seemed like the polite thing to do, and then I pushed the seat back. I asked the coordinator if there was a washroom on this level. There was a pause of approximately 2 seconds before he told me it was down the east corridor, 3rd door. I thanked him and left. The form in my pocket still said Supplemental Practical Observation, Track 7. I still had no idea what Track 7 was. Whatever it was, I figured I'd find out when I got back.